So welcome to today's webinar, Hear My Voice, Including Community Voices at Post-Secondary Institutions. My name is Michelle Nilsson, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. I'm an associate professor at Simon Fraser University in the Faculty of Education, where I both conduct research using participatory and community-engaged research methods, as well as study that and part of the CFICE project with Peter Andree, who we'll be hearing from later today, and the rest of this wonderful panel. We have three presenters with us today. Presenters, please give a little wave as I introduce each of you. So we'll start first with Heather Reed. She's the Operations Director of Abbey Gardens. It's a nonprofit charity providing economic and recreational opportunities for Haliburton County. Heather has a background in recreation management, outdoor education, small business, and community-based research. She gained experience brokering projects between the university and community in Nova Scotia at Acadia University. Upon moving to Haliburton County, she was the program coordinator and then the director of the ULink Center for the Community-Based Research. In 2013, Heather took on the role of operations director at Abbey Gardens and continues to foster relationships with the university in her current position. Thank you, Heather, for joining us today. Next, we have Peter Andree. He's an associate professor in the Department of Political Science. His research focuses on international and Canadian environmental politics, the political economy of agri-food systems, and community-based responses to the challenges of food security and agricultural sustainability. He is co-editor of Globalization and Food Sovereignty, Global and Local Change in the New Politics of Food, to be published by the University of Toronto Press, or was published in March of 2014. He's also the author of Genetically Modified Diplomacy on the Global Politics of Regulating Genetically Modified Crops and Foods, published by the UBC Press. Next, we have Amy Jones. She's the Knowledge Mobilization Coordinator with the Leslie Harris Center of the Regional Policy and Development at Memorial University in Newfoundland. Amy helps make research, teaching, and public engagement at Memorial relevant to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador through creating connections and facilitating effective partnerships. Amy delivers the Thriving Regions Partnership process, which engages communities and provides funding and supports to faculty, staff, and students to build meaningful research partnerships for thriving social and economic regions. We're happy to have all three joining us today to discuss their experiences and strategies for bringing community voices more fully to the post-secondary sphere. So I'm going to ask Heather to get us started in this discussion with her experiences from the community perspective. Heather, if you could go ahead.
Thank you for including me today. Abbey Gardens is a community-based project, and the picture you see here is an overview of our property. We have 350 acres, and about 150 of that is gravel pit that we're looking to restore and create a community space. So right now we have a local food focus, and we have a food hub and a garden. We do a lot of educational programming, and then garden projects that look at restoring the land. You can check our website for more details about Abbey Gardens in particular. But I wanted to highlight in this talk, one of the things I think our project does is it offers a lot of variety for student projects and ongoing research. So those connections with universities become really helpful for us as a community organization, but also really great experiences for students. And part of our philosophy is to provide those opportunities. We have a long history with Trent University as well. Our founder went to Trent and has maintained those connections. And my background with the ULink Center for Community-Based Research also helped create that connection. Fleming College is another academic institution that we tend to partner with as well. And we make that a priority as a community organization to try to integrate with academics and access those resources. So some of the ways that we connect, particularly with Trent, we do projects every year through the ULink Center for Community-Based Research. That's a very unique organization that acts as a broker in Haliburton County for students, primarily at the undergraduate level, to get community-based research experience by doing real-life projects. And so we've done lots of land-based projects that are inventories of the types of birds or the types of flora and fauna on our property, trail work, restoration, planning projects. We've also, related to our programming, done some curriculum research with students, and right now we're working on a composting experiment, which the student came up and took compost materials from our property in particular, and then is working on testing them in different types of mixtures in the lab at Trent. So that's been a really useful vehicle for us. We also have established a graduate scholarship with Trent specifically. So on an annual basis, we have access to a graduate student who is paid through an endowment specifically to work with us on whatever challenge we have at the time or opportunity. And this year, that student is looking at modifying our hoop house, which is in the picture there. And so we worked to do some modifications to see if we could extend the season any further. For those of you who are in the cold parts of the country, we hit -20, so I think our season extension may be over after today. The other connection that we have with Trent, which I think is really critical, is connections with faculty. So faculty have been involved in several of the planning meetings, etc., as Abbey Gardens developed, and we try to continue maintaining those links. These are our heritage ponies on the property. So I think for me, in the experience that I've had, the key things that help us to really make sure that our priorities and the community priorities are really at the forefront is really about engaging with faculty on an ongoing basis and keeping that link really strong, because the students come in and out of the project on a year-to-year basis, but the faculty are the ones that are committed and can help provide the context to the students as we're developing projects. And in our case, certainly having faculty around our planning table also creates an investment in what we're doing and what research would be helpful at what time. I think, again, one of the other keys is really understanding from a community point of view, what are the appropriate expectations? So what is the academic year? When can students and faculty get involved? When they can't? What's the pace of how fast research happens relative to how fast things happen in your community? Because they're often two different speeds. But I think the solid understanding and experience of all of those elements really is what makes the project successful, and then that's what makes the community focus possible. And of course, with anything, just that communication is really key at all stages of the development of whatever the project is. And that's it for me.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Heather. I have a number of questions if you're open to them. You mentioned having faculty connections and sort of this idea of the pace being different between the academic year and the community year, just in terms of how fast or how slow things are working. I was just wondering if there are some systems in place that facilitate the working together across community and campuses that help bridge some of those differences in terms of like the pacing or some other elements that you've noticed in terms of working together.
Yeah, I think it's a joint understanding of that, because there's some fixed realities. Our season, our high season here is when students aren't generally in school. So it's really, I think, looking at what opportunity does that create as opposed to focusing on the challenge that that creates. So how can we conduct projects through the September to April timeframe that would allow us to collect data during our busy season and then feed that back into other students who can then tackle it in the fall when they're back at school. But again, when I was thinking about this presentation, it really comes back to that person that you can call at the university who understands what you're doing.
Yeah, I heard that clearly through your mentioning that the faculty connection is really important.
Yeah.
And communication. So I was just wondering too if there are any enablers or systems beyond those individual relationships, or even systems that can support those individual relationships. For example, I'm thinking specifically of like time buyouts or something like that for the community to be involved in the coming to the campus, and so there's this mutuality that happens, this porousness between the campus and the community. Are there things that
I think we're very lucky because we have ULinks in our community, and that brokering model is a system, and it's something that I think keeps the program alive and keeps students coming up to our area, because we're about a 2-hour drive from the university. So that helps us bridge the gap of distance, and also brings another person around the table who really is trying to balance the different interests that come into a research project and help facilitate that through. So that's a really helpful tool. And, simple things of having a written agreement at the beginning of a project that you can have a good discussion about. So then you have something to go back to at the end of a project, or if it's going off the rails or whatever.
Right. Okay, great. And so I just want to mention, Nicole just posted in the chat box the link to ULinks for people that aren't familiar with that organization. It's, as Heather mentioned, a brokering organization that works in Haliburton County and with Trent University, and I'm guessing Fleming College too, and a number of community organizations to help bridge those conversations and the projects. Which brings me to another question about who decides on the projects, and how can you explain a little bit more about what that process is like and how that negotiation comes about between the campuses?
For Abbey Gardens projects?
Yeah, specifically just as an example.
So we as a staff team sort of sit together and brainstorm what things would be most useful for us in any given calendar, like academic calendar year. And then we use the help of ULinks to help us put those into proposals that are then pitched to a variety of different classes and faculty at Trent. So that's sort of the system. And I'm trying to think, partly because I worked at ULinks, I have a good understanding of sort of where the most active faculty members are and what the courses are all about. So it's, but that just takes a little bit of experience to be able to shape your project so you're more likely to have it matched with students who are really interested in what are the priorities for you.
Nice. Great. Thank you so much, Heather. And if anybody else that's on the webinar today is participating and has some questions for Heather, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll be able to get to them at the end. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
Now that we have a better understanding of how community-based organization has advocated for the inclusion of their voice at a local post-secondary institution, we'll turn to Peter Andree to talk about how he advocates for community inclusion as a faculty member at Carleton University. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks so much. It was great to go right after Heather. I think Haliburton's doing some things really, really well. I've always been impressed by ULinks, and as you'll see as I get into the presentation, it's related to an organization well. In fact, some of the work that I did was up in Haliburton in the early stages of my own work, and but I think that how ULinks has developed as an organization and is able to leverage the capacity of local post-secondary institutions, not even local, a couple of hours away, is really a great example for a lot of other communities in Canada, particularly rural communities. And just I also need to just point out this idea of the graduate scholarship, the endowed graduate scholarship that Abbey Gardens has been able to create to get ongoing graduate student support for your work is a really neat model, and I'd love to hear more about that later in the discussion if we have time. I'm very happy to be here. As Michelle said at the beginning, I'm an associate professor in political science at Carleton University. Before I got to Carleton, I spent a lot of time in Peterborough, Ontario, south of Haliburton, and did some of my graduate work and taught at Trent University in Peterborough. In putting this presentation together, I was asked as a faculty member who works a lot with community organizations and bringing community voices into the university, either in my teaching or in my research or in my administrative responsibilities as an associate chair within my department. And I thought what I would do for the next 5 or 6 minutes that I have left is tell you a little bit about my journey. Not so much, I really want to emphasize that I don't want to be boasting here about what I've done, but more to show that there is a path for faculty members who might be watching this to very actively work in community engagement and tick all the boxes that you need to tick for getting tenure and promotion within universities. If you go to the next slide, Nicole, you'll see a photo of my colleagues Trish Balamingi and Charles Levko, who are both also co-investigators within the CFICE project, and they are representative of, I can name dozens of people across the country who do this work of working very actively with community partners, both in teaching and research, and who are, making a place for themselves within academia as engaged scholars. And that's really my point today, is that this kind of work can bring community voices in meaningful ways within institutions and classes and so on, and benefit your career as a faculty member. Having said that, I also want to emphasize that institutional change to get community voices better heard within universities and colleges can be a slow process. I think the journey is worth it, and I'll share some of my journey, but it really has been probably about a 20-year journey now. So Nicole, if you can go to the next slide. Back in the early 90s, I was doing my undergraduate degree at Trent. I was very much an activist on environmental issues and animal rights issues and human rights issues. I ended up working closely with a small nonprofit in Peterborough called the Kawartha World Issue Center, where I really learned some amazing skills in terms of popular education and community development that frankly have helped me in my teaching over the 20 years since. These days people talk about design thinking and so on, putting sticky notes up on boards to help in the learning and the co-creation process. But a lot of those techniques, go back to Paulo Freire and pedagogy of the oppressed, and these ideas from decades ago that I think we're continuing to carry forward in this community campus engagement movement. When I was a master's student, I was really keen on the idea that I'd been reading about participatory and community-based research and wanted to practice that, and so I developed a master's that was really grounded in the community context in Peterborough and the Kawarthas, looking at strategies around agricultural sustainability. And that became, while I was doing that, I was part of the early courses and sort of experiments between a couple of faculty members at Trent, Tom Willans and John Wadlin, and some community organizations, namely the Peterborough Social Planning Council and Community Opportunities and Innovation Network, the Community Economic Development Organization, to work on what became the Trent Center for Community-Based Education, and these days called the TCRC, the Trent Community Research Center, now housed as of the last few months back within Trent University, but for a while established outside of the university, like ULinks is up in Haliburton, being a broker for community projects. I've been connected to them for a long time, and through that, when I was teaching at Trent, I first started teaching probably in the late 90s and early 2000s, I was able to teach courses that allowed students to get the practical experience of working with community organizations, and at the same time, really through that, providing some capacity to organizations in Peterborough and beyond, working on a variety of issues. Now, if you go to the next slide, Nicole. In 2006, I got my job at Carleton University in Ottawa. 2007, again, this isn't meant to be boasting, but it was interesting that I applied for and won a Teaching Achievement Award at Carleton, in fact, at Carleton, based on the community-based teaching I was doing at Trent, because it was seen as a real innovation as I brought that to Carleton. And they wanted to reward me for it and give me some funds to develop community-based research courses at Carleton. Again, so this isn't meant to be boasting, but more to say that this can really be something that is part of a faculty member's portfolio that makes them attractive to institutions. While at Carleton, I realized that there wasn't much of a support network for community engagement, and so initially shortly after I got my teaching award, in fact, an initiative did start called the Initiative for Community University Engagement, led by Ted Jackson, that I started participating in. And in those meetings, which brought together community partners as well as staff and faculty at Carleton who worked at the intersection of community and the university, I realized that what we needed was a community of practice that was specifically for faculty members who work with community partners in their teaching. And in the research, but particularly in their teaching. And so I helped to create what became the Carleton Committee on Community Engaged Pedagogy, which has, over the last 10 years, done a whole variety of things, including annual community engagement events. There's a little picture on the right there of that. We've also produced a report, did some research where we looked at how many students within Carleton were actively engaging with community partners in their teaching each year, and the number we got was quite surprising. It was over 2,500 per year, but a lot of that activity was happening under the radar, and so by our committee doing that research, we were able to sort of bring that up to the front. Also coming out of both IQ, the Initiative for Community University Engagement, and the people who gathered together there, and then the faculty members who participated in the Community Engaged Pedagogy Committee, is this CFICE project that we're doing right now. It was actually faculty members with their community partners who had already been connecting through those communities of practice at Carleton, who worked with Jerry Briggs from the Canadian Alliance for Community Service Learning to develop the initial CFICE research proposal, and then to create this project. And there's a photograph on the bottom right there of some of our community partners at a learning event, or an evaluation event that we had in January 2017 of the CFICE project. I'm guessing I'm close to being out of time. I'll just go into the next slide, and I'll quickly point out that I feel that there's been a real surge of interest in community engagement over the last 10 years that I've been doing this work. I feel like I've been knocking on the doors of upper administration at Carleton to ask for more resourcing for this type of work for a long time. And we're finally starting to see the fruits of that labor. Just in the last couple of years, I've been part of Carleton's Experiential Learning Steering Committee, which sees community engaged learning under that larger umbrella, and that's really related to how it's understood by the province of Ontario. The photograph on the right here is our new president, Benoit Bacon, addressing the Experiential Learning Symposium that we had just last month or so, talking about how important this type of teaching is, community engagement and otherwise. Through the CFICE project, we've managed to launch this national network. You know, we being a whole bunch of people, including, in particular, I have to mention Maeve Leiden's leadership on this front to help create a national movement around community campus engagement coming out of CFICE. And then finally, just in the last little while, Carleton has developed a strategic transformation group on community engagement. And just yesterday, I was invited to participate in a new steering committee on community engagement. So all of this is to say that, you know, if you're interested in community engagement as a faculty member, if you can go to the next slide, Nicole, actually, I'm going to skip over this. You can always ask me about the course in Belize. If you're interested in community engagement as a faculty member, know that it can be part of your teaching, it can be part of your research, it will be valued by the institution, as well as you're also doing the conventional academic outputs of books and journal articles, many of which can be based in this work in community engagement, and it can benefit your career. So I encourage faculty members to do this work, and it's really rewarding to both from the teaching point of view and from a research point of view. Maybe I'll just end it there.
Great, Peter. Thank you so much. I think you hit on a lot of the questions I had in terms of what's the value to you as a researcher and as a faculty member to doing and engaging your work in these ways that might not ordinarily, or if you had engaged your work in other ways, that makes it different.
Sure. You just cut out a little bit there, Michelle.
Your work. Oh, sorry. So
Okay.
I was just saying you already hit on a lot of the questions I had. So I just will ask you one question. What's the value to you as a researcher and a faculty member of working in these ways beyond, as you said, being attractive to universities, but to you personally as a scholar?
Well, I mean, for me as an educator, I love to see my students succeed. And frankly, it's the bright lights that go on in their eyes and the networks they build and the jobs that they're getting afterwards. That's so rewarding. As a researcher, I feel like my results are so much more grounded in day-to-day realities. I'm doing a project on the future of farming in Hastings County right now, and just this morning I got feedback from the head of economic development in Hastings on a draft report saying this is what, these are the questions I have based on your work. And you don't get that kind of feedback unless you're deeply integrated with community organizations that you're accountable to and their networks, and then you get that, you get better research results. And then, from a career advancement point of view, I feel like while some faculty members feel like community-based research is not respected in their disciplines, in my case, I think it has been. And so, that's all good.
Great. Thanks so much, Peter. So now we'll turn to Amy Jones from the Harris Center at Memorial University, who helps oversee a unique program connecting the Newfoundland and Labrador communities with Memorial University. Welcome, Amy.
All right, so I'm Amy Jones. I'm the Knowledge Mobilization Coordinator at the Harris Center, and I'm happy that you've asked me to participate today. It's great to be involved and to hear from the other presenters as well. So I'll tell you a little bit. I'm going to start my timer also, just because I want to know, have an idea of how much time this is taking. So I'm at Memorial University, and we're very lucky here in that the university has a special obligation to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. So that's stated in our mission and our vision. So we actually do have a responsibility to the province to be relevant to the province and the people here. So public engagement has always been very important to the university. We're the only one in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. So we also have developed a public engagement framework. It's one of our core areas of our mission, along with research and teaching and learning. So public engagement, we have developed a framework that puts it on equal footing with the other parts of the university. So that's also important to keep in mind. So to us, public engagement involves mutual respect, mutual contributions, and mutual benefits for all participants. So it's not just sharing the knowledge or consulting, it's actually collaborating with people for mutual benefit. So the Harris Center is a part of Memorial University. So we're a center for regional development and public policy. And so our main goals are to assist in the responsible development of the economy and society of our province, and to stimulate informed discussion of important provincial issues. So some of the ways that we do that, we have public policy forums, podcasts, publications, research funds, and we have yaffle.ca, importantly. If you have never heard of Yaffle before, you can check it out. It's yaffle.ca, and that's a place where people can go in and put in their research expertise, or any expertise. Anybody in the province can put in any expertise they have, create a profile. And if they have ideas for research, teaching, public engagement, all those can be put in there as opportunities. So that's an important asset that we have here. So part of my role is to broker relationships between inside and outside university, and I also run our regional development programming. So I'm going to talk more about our regional development programming specifically. So our regional workshops was our main way of doing regional development from 2005 to 2016, so for 11 years. So we held workshops in 4 regions a year throughout the province. They were based on the 20 regional economic development zones, so you can see those in that map. So we were in every single zone at least twice, sometimes 3 times. So we work with a local planning committee to come up with 3 to 4 themes for each workshop, and it was a great way of doing our work for about 11 years. So some of the outcomes, they built awareness and relationships. So over the 11 years, the workshops brought over 600 Memorial faculty, staff, and students together with over 1,100 people around the province, and identified almost 900 ideas for potential projects. So we recorded those ideas as opportunities. So the morning session of our regional workshops, we'd bring Memorial faculty, staff, and students out, tell people in the region what the expertise was, what's already happening, what's going on. And then the afternoon, we would use to gather those opportunities and ideas. And then we would use those opportunities to put in YAFL, and we would try to broker them. So that's how it, my next point on my slide, it resulted in multiple brokering opportunities. And then oftentimes we would be able to find someone to work on those projects. So there would be applied research, mostly research, but sometimes teaching and public engagement projects. So we had dozens of projects throughout the years. So although it was very successful, there were some issues with it. So in 2012, the Regional Economic Development Boards closed, and the following year, so did our rural secretariat. So a lot of the regions that we worked with lost their capacity to bring people to, wasn't really capacity in the regions for somebody to bring people together as a facilitator, regional planner, convener. So we were sort of more under pressure to fill in that gap and create more sustained relationships instead of one-off workshop. And then also more university capacity. With so many opportunities, we'd come back from a workshop with 20 to 30 different ideas. It was hard to focus on, okay, which ones are most important? How are we gonna find people to work on them? The researchers didn't have any funding to do them, so it was just based on guessing, maybe this person might take this on. So there wasn't any funding there to support the researchers to do the research. So there were some issues we had to address. So in 2017, we changed our model and we developed a Thriving Regions partnership process. So this process includes more sustained relationships and meaningful engagements with the regions that we go to. So it's over about a 1.5-year process, plus beyond that. We haven't done the full process anywhere yet, so we'll see how long it continues on in each particular case. It involves dedicated research funding. So we go to 2 regions a year, and we go for at least 2 to 3 different workshops. Well, actually 3 to 4 different workshops. And we provide $15,000 in funding for 3 research projects in each region. So we actually have dedicated research funding for the project ideas that come up at the workshops. And we've also built in more partnerships with other Memorial University units. So our Grenfell campus is on the west coast of the province, on the other side of the province. And we work with the Grenfell Office of Engagement there, and then also the Labrador Institute in Happy Valley Goose Bay in Labrador. So I'll talk a little bit more about the actual process and how it works. And I only have a few minutes left, time flies. So the first thing we do is we establish a local advisory committee. So they help us decide on the place, date, location, that kind of thing for the workshop. And they help us promote the workshop. So then we hold a workshop with just community people, not Memorial, not university people, just people from the region, where they tell us what they'd like us to work on. So they identify themes, priorities for us that they'd like to see people from Memorial working on. So the process of getting that out during that workshop is some individual reflection, large group discussion, and small group discussion. So we used to do this process with our advisory committees over a couple month period over the phone, but we find it's a lot better to just get everybody out in the room, come up with the priorities, and use those so we have more people involved and it doesn't take as much resources to get those at those priorities. So then we finalize them with the help of an advisory committee, and we open an applied research fund. So we ask for expressions of interest from people, faculty, staff, and students at the university. We ask for 1,000 words, and ask them to just tell us how they'd like to address the research needs in the region that were identified. Then we have an evaluation committee that consists of local people as well as academics, who reviews all the expressions of interest and decides who gets the funding. So we use an online process to do that. Then once we choose those 3 projects to move forward, we bring them back to the region again. So we have another workshop. We invite everybody who's at the last workshop and promote it to anybody else who's interested in the region. And the researchers attend that workshop and get feedback on their expressions of interest and develop community partnerships if they don't have any already, or if they want to expand on the ones that they already have. So then they use that feedback to write a more expanded research plan. And then that plan gets evaluated by our evaluation committee. And then they get the funding. So then they get $15,000 to complete the research in the region. And they use some of that research funding to go back to the region again. So then they're always involved in the region throughout the research. And yeah, it's been a great process so far. So then they have a year to complete their projects, and then a year later we bring them back again for a final workshop, which we haven't done yet because we just started this last year, but we're planning to do that probably this February actually, with the first researchers who are going to finish up their projects. And we're going to do a strategic doing process. So that's a facilitation technique that we're just getting trained up in how to actually move those projects forward in the region. So we're not just doing a final presentation and walking away. We're going to actually work with people there to say, okay, now this is the results. How can this move forward in your region? And the length of time that we're going to be involved with that process is yet to be seen. So I'm pretty much out of time, but I'm going to just skim through this stuff really quick, just for you guys to know. So we've been to 3 regions so far. So one is the Great Northern Peninsula, one's the Baber Peninsula, and one is the Southwest Coast. And you can just see the different themes there. So in each of those, in the Northern Peninsula and Baber Peninsula, we've funded 3 projects in each of those regions so far. And I don't really have a lot of time, but I can tell you a bit more about those projects during the Q&A if you're interested. And on the Southwest Coast, we just went there last month. So actually right now, the review committee is looking at the projects and deciding which ones are going to move forward in that region. I have some challenges and strategies which you were looking for information on during my presentation. So I'll just quickly run through those. So one of the challenges that we faced has been a lack of funding for community engaged research. So strategy, we've found money. We created a proposal with our provincial and federal governments, Department of Tourism, Culture, Industry and Innovation, and the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, and the International Grenfell Association have all supported this work. So we found funding to dedicate to research, which has helped us greatly. A challenge we used to find was that there was a lack of interested researchers. Funding has helped with that we have the dedicated funding. And we have had over 10 or more applications for all of our funds so far, which we've been happy with. And people have just had very interesting and great projects that who knows if they would have happened in those regions if we weren't offering this funding. So we have been lucky and happy to have found researchers who wanted to engage with us. So a challenge has been lacking relationships with people inside and outside the university. So we had to build that relationship building into our process. So, you know, we build the workshops in, we do have this process that we keep going back to the region, and we work with an advisory committee, and we help the researchers do that throughout their research as well. If they need to meet with any community partners, or if they want to set up a community meeting, we give them that support and help them do that. Challenge is knowing who is doing what and where, because this is a huge province, and building relationships, you need to know who to build relationships with. So something that has helped us with that is partnering with our Grenfell campus, the Grenfell Office of Engagement, and the Labrador Institute, because they can help us really with their connections in those regions as well. A challenge that we have found through this process is striking the balance between community needs and researcher independence. So going back and forth constantly throughout this process between the evaluation committee and the researcher giving feedback is something new to us. Our other research funds, it's just they put an application, they got funding or not, and that was it. But there's much more communication now to make this sure this research is relevant. So we just build clear communication into the process, and we're really learning as we go, and it's worked so far. A challenge is perceived lack of community and regional capacity. But the strategy is that we do recognize there's plenty of capacity, we just need to find ways to mobilize it. And a challenge is moving research into action, and so we've supported very applied research projects, and we plan to use a facilitation project to help them move forward as much as we can. And that's it. Sorry if I went a little bit too long.
No, you're fine. Thank you so much, Amy. That was great. I think you preempted a lot of the questions I had. So if it's okay with you, I'll turn to the questions that are coming in online. And while we're waiting for those, I'm going to read some of the questions that people sent in advance of the webinar today. And so none of these are specific to any one of you, so I'll just leave them open. So first we have a question from Denise, and I will just ask, and anyone can pick this up that would like to. Her question is, how can local public libraries become partners with post-secondary institutions? Is there somebody that's had experience with that or that would like to take that? Amy, Heather, Peter?
I would be the best to answer that. Hopefully one of the other panelists.
Okay. Peter?
Well, because nobody else is answering it, the first thing I would say is that local public libraries have allies within institutions, I suspect, and that's the university libraries. Each university has quite a few librarians who really will understand what you're doing in the local public library. And so I think that's where I would start the conversation to say, we would love to be more involved with you. How can we do that? Yeah, and I've seen, what I've seen from librarians is that they are getting way more creative and innovative in how they work, because, you know, frankly, the stacks of books in our libraries are hardly getting used by students or anybody else these days. But there's still tons of information being shared and stored, and new ways to connect. And so our university librarians work closely with profs and classes in a variety of learning opportunities. We have a librarian at Carleton right now, I just learned, who's joining my Community Engaged Pedagogy Committee because she has a mandate to develop more of the local archives for the Ottawa area based at Carleton. And I'm sure she would love to be connecting with the Ottawa librarians as she does that. So that's just my, I'd love it if there's some librarians who are listening who might tune in, and it looks like Heather has a point, but I would say start connecting with university librarians and go from there.
Great, thanks, Peter. Heather?
Yeah, I think from a community perspective too, there's lots of programming opportunities with students at libraries. So how can education students, or in any particular topic, help local libraries create programming for a variety of different age groups? Mm-hmm. I'm also thinking about just the different types of media and how information gets shared. I think there's sometimes a gap in small local libraries and our ability to hit the millennial demographic, and also, you know, even access to high speed limits some of the things that we can do, but even some information exchange around how do you start to make your local library, you know, get into YouTube, get into some of these new media channels that are really getting picked up in terms of how people access information. And then just a local story, the Haliburton County Library System actually catalogs all of the student projects that are done through ULinks. So you can access that undergraduate research through the ULinks office, but you can also access it through the library system up here, which is a really great service.
Nice. Thank you, Heather. And that connects really well to our next question that's coming to us from Kendra Cheeseman. She says, I'm going to connect first to that undergraduate piece. So do you have introductory tools for educating undergraduate and graduate students? She's asking specifically in planning and landscape architecture on community engaged research. And then she has a second question. How do you create a friendly foundation for those with a background in social sciences / knowledge of intersectionality to understand how important this work is, this kind of work?
I can just speak briefly to the question of for landscape planning and so on. No, I don't know of any specific resources, though they may be out there. So, you know, do some good internet searching for that. But on the preparing undergraduate students in general for community-based research, I just want to point out that through the CFICE research project that's broadcasting this webinar today, we have a team led by Professor Steve Hill at Trent University, who's developing modules on this whole idea of pathways to community engagement and what are the tools that undergraduate students need to be able to do community-based research at upper undergraduate levels and at the graduate level. What are the tools that need to be put into place at first and second year level? So I'm sure Steve wouldn't mind if I'd say you could email him and start getting a sense of what he's doing. Also check out the CFICE website. I know we've had some blogs on this topic and so on, and we'll have more tools coming up in the coming months. Yes, maybe that's what I remember of that I wanted to say. So connect with Steve Hill and stay tuned to CFICE on some of these tools. In terms of students in I think it was students in humanities and social sciences.
Exactly,
with the sort of background intersectionality. There are an increasing number of journal articles and books on community-based research, many of which are grounded in sort of a real, you know, I mentioned Paulo Freire and popular education earlier on. Community-based participatory research has a strong kind of social justice angle to it, and so many students that are interested in social justice questions are really drawn to community-based and participatory research. One set of tools that I would point this person to is to go to the Community Campus Partnerships for Health, which is a US-based but North America-wide organization that really encourages community-based participatory research, and much of it is very intersectional. While it has the name health in it, much of it is also very much social justice research, and there's some amazing tools on their website.
Agree, that's a great resource. Thank you so much, Peter. Heather, Amy, did you want to add to that, or should I move on to the next question?
I was just going to say, I know something that we've done here at the Harris Center, we partnered with the School of Graduate Studies, and it wasn't a certificate program, but it was a program throughout a semester of 4 to 5 different sessions on knowledge mobilization, working with communities, developing tools for dissemination of research and that kind of thing. So We've done that before, so that has been something that was really well received by the grad students who did it. And we are also at the university here doing a program called LEAD. I can't think on now what it stands for, but it's based on the semester in dialogue program at Simon Fraser University, something similar, where undergraduate students are going to be able to take a semester and work on a community engaged project for that semester, and then we'll get credit for it. So that's something that's new and being worked on here now, and I'm not sure when it'll be up and running, but it's an interesting program for sure.
Nice. That sounds wonderful. And
Yeah.
What a great opportunity too for people to get the credential if they would like that.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. So the next question is from Christian Rangel. The question is twofold. First, how to show clinical teachers or instructors the relevance of identifying community needs, not only the social determinants of health. And second, how to help them think of ways to bring communities, not only affected patients, into their research for better curriculum design and clinical care. So should I repeat the question? So the first part is about identifying, helping teachers and clinical teachers and instructors to identify the relevance of identifying community needs and not just the social determinants of health. So like making sure that it's based within the community that they're working with, not just a standard that's national or international. And then second of all, how to help them think about ways to bring communities, not just the patients, into the research for better curriculum design and clinical care.
So I'll just speak very briefly to this, Michelle. Again, I think Community Campus Partnerships for Health will have a lot of useful resources for this person, and so I'd encourage them to check that out. The other area of health research where we've seen such a strong demand and thus a lot of innovation around the involvement of communities is in HIV/AIDS research. Right, the whole nothing about us without us movement in HIV research that started in the late 1980s has really transformed health research in that area. And so, there's the Canadian HIV/AIDS Research Network, which I believe, so this person may not be working in HIV/AIDS research, but I think there are some pedagogical innovations and some research innovations that have happened in that sector that are probably relevant. So that's where I might point them towards.
Great, thank you. And in Vancouver, that's the Dudes Club down in East Van or downtown East Side. Thank you so much. Heather or Amy, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a comment. I mean, I think not to be cynical, but I think sometimes if that whole idea of placing importance on community needs, if it's not there, it's a really challenging thing to build if that's not where you're coming from. But I also know we've experienced some challenges in terms of the clinical scenario in that context is in rural communities, particularly with undergraduate students, it becomes problematic in terms of privacy, students' ability and maturity in terms of being able to participate in that kind of research in community with clients. So I think there's also some ethics and just some logistical things that make clinical research with engaging students a little bit more challenging. So it's good to go into it eyes wide open.
Great, thank you. So I'm conscious of the fact that we have 2 minutes left, and I have a question here from Maeve Leiden. Maeve asks, community inclusion can sometimes feel patronizing to people who situate themselves as part of larger society, regardless of whether they work in a higher education institution or not. The power to include community or not still rests with the institution. Increasingly, NGOs, civil society, First Nations, and even funders and policymakers are doing their own research and or leading the partnerships with higher education and bringing significant resources and opportunities for academic students and institutions as a whole. So her question is, using a broader and critical framework where universities are publicly accountable institutions, academics are responsive, and the society is the context for partnerships and actions. What are your priorities for systemic and structural changes, policies, incentives, or infrastructure, etc., to democratize and unleash the substantial power and accountability of higher education in Canada? And how do you define community and or situate the role of higher education within community? It's a big question, so we have about a minute to get to that. But I think it's a nice one for us to leave with, to be able to think about beyond just today. But if somebody wants to get started on tackling that one, I invite you to do so.
I don't know if I can tackle the whole thing,
Well, you
but
give it a good chew. Thanks, Heather.
You know, again, I go back to ULinks and the role that they've played in Haliburton and the role of an academic institution. And some of you may know John Wadlin, and he was really the pioneer of Trent's role in our community. And I always remember when I first met him thinking, and him saying, you know, this is your community's institution, and keep us accountable and keep us at the table. And he's much more eloquent than I am, but that was a really powerful message, because I think there is, it is also up to the community to say, hey, we want you here and we want to keep seeing you here. And that's what helps move that along in terms of the university's role. And boy, if you look at the history of 25 years of undergraduate research in our little community, it's huge. It's a huge legacy, because that commitment has been carrying on for a long time. So I think it can't be positioned as an obligation. It has to be positioned as people coming together for, you know, for student experience, for community betterment. And that is part of what our institutions are all about, what they have to bring to the table.
Thanks. Thank you, Heather.
I'll just say a few words on that. Something that we used to do with our old regional workshops, we used to spend a full morning going over what Memorial University is, what we do. We'd have researchers present on their research and their expertise and all that, and we'd spend a couple hours on that. But we realized that that's not the place to start when we do go out and do these workshops. So we don't even bring anybody from the university out for our first workshop. We just start with, okay, these are the people who live here, and that's who's in the room, and we just help facilitate the discussion on what they'd like to see happening. And even that is, you know, we struggle with, okay, do we start with going out? Like, what is the starting point here? So it is a question that we struggle with a little bit, as where the starting point should be. Should we wait for people to come to us? Should we go out? How do we decide where we're going to go? Who our partners are? All that is still stuff. It's just things that you have to consider and try your best with. Sure. But we're just learning as we go, for sure, when it comes to that.
Yeah, thank you. So we're at the end of our time and our webinar together today, and I apologize for going a little bit over time. I'd like to thank our presenters for their wonderful presentations and their thoughts in the question and answer period. And also thank you to the attendees for your active engagement in this webinar. As a reminder, the link to the webinar and the video will be sent out within the next day or two, or 24 to 48 hours. And I encourage you all to sign up for the CFICE's newsletter if you haven't already, to hear more about the future webinars. There are more coming up in the next 2 weeks. So we invite you to join us for those as well. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you all, Peter, Heather, Amy, for presenting and sharing your great ideas and experiences with us today.